The silence in the penthouse was a manufactured thing. It was the kind of quiet that cost a fortune, engineered with triple-paned, gas-filled windows that muted the city of Seoul to a distant, theoretical hum. For 3 years, this silence had been the primary texture of Alara Vance's life. It was a silence that did not soothe. It was the sound of a gilded cage, the sound of her own breathing, the sound of her son's small feet patting on the marble floors. It was the sound of waiting. Tonight, the silence was different. It was heavier, charged with the ozone of a coming storm. Marcus Thorne stood across the living room, his posture a study in performative relaxation. One hand was in the pocket of his bespoke trousers, the other held a sheaf of papers. He was smiling, but the expression did not reach his eyes. His eyes, Ilara had learned, were the only honest part of him. They were perpetually hungry, perpetually dissatisfied. "It's the final step, Ilara," he said, his voice a smooth balm that had long ago lost its power to soothe her. "The obsidian spire, your masterpiece, our masterpiece. Just a signature, and we secure the funding. We break ground next month." She looked at the papers, then at him. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been entirely accurate and was now 3 years out of date. The old Ilara, the one who believed in partnerships and shared dreams, might have felt a flicker of pride. The woman standing before him now felt nothing but the cold, hard weight of reality. The obsidian spire was her design, conceived in the stolen pre-dawn hours while her captor slept. It was a testament to a spirit he thought he had broken. It was hers, alone. "No," she said. The word was small, but it landed in the oppressive quiet with the force of a physical blow. Marcus's smile faltered, a crack in the polished facade. "What did you say?" "I said no." This time, her voice was firmer. She had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times, played out 1,000 different scenarios. In most of them, she was braver. In all of them, he was angrier. He took a step forward, the papers crinkling in his grip. "This isn't a negotiation, Ilara. This is a formality. You have an obligation to me, to this family." She thought about the word family. She thought about the day she had given birth to Leo, the sterile white room, the terror and the joy warring within her. She thought about Marcus appearing 2 days later, not with flowers, but with 2 large men and a private ambulance. She thought about the needle in her arm, the world dissolving into a blur, and waking up here, in this penthouse, her world shrunk to 4,000 square feet of marble and glass. Her son was with her, and for that she had endured everything else. That was the bargain she had made with the universe. But the bargain was over. Leo was 3 now. He was a person with thoughts and a burgeoning will of his own. He deserved more than a cage, no matter how beautiful. "I have no obligation to you, Marcus," she said, her voice steady. "You forfeited that right 3 years ago." The mask of civility fell away completely. His face contorted, the pleasant features hardening into something ugly and primal. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his movements suddenly stripped of their practiced grace. He was all sharp angles and coiled fury. "You ungrateful bitch," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft fabric of her sleeve, bruising the skin beneath. "Everything you have because of me. This roof, the clothes on your back, the food your son eats. I gave you a canvas and you dare to deny me the finished painting?" She did not scream. She did not struggle. She had learned early on that resistance only fueled his rage, gave him the drama he craved. Instead, she met his gaze, her own eyes clear and cold. "Let go of my arm, Marcus." "You will sign these papers," he snarled, shaking her slightly. "You will sign them, or I will take Leo so far away you'll forget what he looks like. Do you understand me? You are nothing without me. You create for me. That is your purpose." It was the ultimate threat, the one he had always held in reserve. But tonight, It did not land with its usual soul-crushing weight. It landed on a foundation of resolve that had been hardening for 1,095 days. She had been the most capable person in every room she had ever been in, a fact he had exploited but never understood. Her mind was a fortress he could not breach. He could cage her body, but not her intellect. He could steal her work, but not her talent. The hand connected with her cheek. It was a sharp, cracking sound that finally broke the engineered silence. Her head snapped to the side, her hair flying across her face. The sting was immediate, blossoming into a hot, throbbing pain. A small, involuntary gasp escaped her lips. She did not scream. From the corner of the vast room, a place steeped in shadow beyond the cone of light from the main chandelier, there came a sound. It was a small, precise clink, the sound of a heavy crystal glass being set down on a marble coaster. Marcus froze. His hand was still raised, his body thrumming with adrenaline and rage. He slowly turned his head, his eyes trying to pierce the gloom. He had forgotten. In his fury, in his absolute certainty of his control over this space, he had forgotten his guest. A figure rose from the deep leather armchair. He moved with a liquid grace that was the opposite of Marcus's jerky aggression. He was not tall, but his presence seemed to warp the dimensions of the room, drawing all light and attention to himself. He wore a charcoal suit of such perfect cut and material that it seemed to absorb the shadows around him. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. He was not performing. He did not rush. He was not there to be a hero in a play. He was there as a force of nature, like a tide coming in. Inevitable. "Mr. Thorne," the man said. His voice was low, a quiet baritone with a precise, almost musical cadence. It was steady as iron wrapped in silk. It carried no hint of anger or alarm. It was a simple statement of fact. "The meeting is over." Marcus stared, his mind struggling to catch up. He saw the immaculate suit, the serene face of Jae-hwa Kwon, the chairman of the Sung-jin Group, the man he had been trying to court for a joint venture, the man he had foolishly invited into his home to demonstrate his power, his perfect life, his beautiful, compliant partner. The arrogance of it, in retrospect, was staggering. He had brought the wolf into his house to admire his sheep. "Mr. Kwon," Marcus stammered, dropping his hand from Ilara's arm. He tried to rearrange his face back into a mask of command, but the pieces no longer fit. Panic was a frantic bird beating against the cage of his ribs. "This is a private family matter, a misunderstanding." Jae-hwa Kwon took a single, deliberate step forward into the light. His gaze flickered from Marcus's disordered state to the red mark blooming on Ilara's cheek. His expression did not change, but a stillness descended upon him, a concentration of power that was more terrifying than any overt threat, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. "You misunderstand," Jae-hwa said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "I said the meeting is over. Now, I am saying something else." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. His eyes met Ilara's for a brief, searing moment. It was not a look of pity. It was a look of recognition. He saw her, not as a possession, not as a victim, but as a person in a situation that was about to be corrected. He turned his gaze back to Marcus. "Take your hand off her." Marcus, flustered, realized he had grabbed her arm again without thinking. He snatched his hand back as if burned. "Look, I don't know what you think you saw. I saw enough," Jae-hwa stated. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Two men materialized from the hallway leading to the private elevator. They were dressed in dark suits, their movements economical and silent. They had been waiting. They were always waiting. They were part of the quiet, structural power that surrounded Jae-hwa Kwon, a power Marcus, with his hollow performed authority, could never comprehend. "Mr. Kwon, this is my home," Marcus blustered, his voice rising in pitch. "You have no right." "Rights are for people who respect them," Jae-hwa said, his voice a flat, cold line. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to his men. Mister, Thorne is unwell. Escort him to his study. Ensure he remains there. The men moved without wasted motion, one on each side of Marcus, their hands firm on his arms. Marcus struggled, his face purpling with impotent rage. Get your hands off me! Do you know who I am? Ilara, tell them this is a mistake! Ilara simply watched, her hand rising to touch her stinging cheek. The chaos was happening around her, but a strange, disorienting calm was settling within her. It was the shock of a sudden pressure change. For 3 years, she had been holding her breath. Now she could finally exhale. As the men steered the sputtering, protesting Marcus toward his study, Jae-hwa Kwan turned his full attention to her. He did not move closer, respecting her space. His dark eyes scanned her face, lingering on the red mark. Are you hurt anywhere else? He asked. The question was direct, clinical. She shook her head, the motion small. No. And your son? The question pierced through her shock. Leo. He's sleeping in his room. Jae-hwa gave another minute nod, this time to a woman who had appeared as silently as the men. She was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun. His assistant. Minjun, please check on the child. Do not wake him. Simply ensure he is safe. The woman, Minjun, bowed her head slightly and disappeared down the hallway. Ilara watched her go, then looked back at the man before her. He was an enigma of stillness and devastating efficiency. Who are you? She whispered, though she knew his name. The question was deeper than that. I am the man who has been looking for you for 18 months, Jae-hwa Kwan replied, his voice a low confidence. I am the man who recognized your signature on the Blue Reef Conservatory project. Your architectural thesis from university was on sustainable aquatic habitats. The design was brilliant. Marcus Thorne does not have a brilliant bone in his body. The air left her lungs in a rush. He knew. He hadn't just stumbled into this. He had sought her out. He had seen her work, her real work, and recognized its author. It was a validation so profound it almost brought her to her knees. After years of being a ghost, of having her identity and talent siphoned away, someone had seen her. You knew? I suspected, he corrected gently. My firm, Sungjin, competed for that contract. We lost. When I reviewed the winning proposal, I knew the design was not Thorne's. It had a discipline, a poetry, that he is incapable of. So I had my people investigate. They found your name buried deep in his company's history. A junior architect who resigned 3 years ago. The same week, a woman matching your description disappeared from St. Mary's maternity ward. He spoke with the dispassionate clarity of a man reading a report about her life. Min-jun returned. The boy is sleeping peacefully, Chairman, she reported in Korean. He is safe. Jae-hwa nodded, his gaze never leaving Ilara's. It is time to go, he said to her in English. It was not a question. It was the closing of a chapter. Go where? She asked, the practicalities of the situation starting to dawn on her. Somewhere safe, he said. He gestured toward the hallway. Pack a bag for yourself and your son. Take only what is essential. Everything else can be replaced. She hesitated, her mind racing. Trust was a foreign currency she hadn't traded in for years. This man radiated power, a power far more absolute than Marcus's had ever been. Was she simply trading one cage for another, more opulent one? He seemed to read the fear and doubt in her eyes. I am not him, he said, his voice softening by a fraction. I have no interest in owning you, Ms. Vance. I have a profound interest in your talent. I want to give you back your name, and then I want to hire you. He paused. But first, I want to ensure you and your son are safe. The rest can wait. There was a finality in his tone, a deep, resonant certainty that cut through her fear. She looked at the red mark on her cheek reflected in the polished black marble of the floor. She thought of Leo, sleeping soundly, unaware that his world was about to change. She had wanted to be braver. Maybe bravery wasn't a loud declaration. Maybe it was a single, quiet step into an unknown future. She gave a sharp, decisive nod. "I'll get our things." The ride down in the private elevator was silent. Alara held a sleeping Leo, wrapped in his favorite blanket, his small body a warm, trusting weight against her chest. She carried a single duffel bag containing their essentials: a few changes of clothes, Leo's worn teddy bear, and a small leather-bound sketchbook she had managed to keep hidden from Marcus. It was filled with designs, ideas, fragments of a future she had never been sure she would see. Jaehua Kwan stood opposite them, a sentinel of calm. He did not look at her. His gaze was fixed on the polished steel doors, but she could feel his awareness of her, of the child in her arms. It was not a predatory awareness, like Marcus's had always been. It was protective, watchful. The elevator opened into a private garage, not the one Marcus used. A sleek black sedan was waiting, its engine purring. One of Jaehua's men held the door open. Ilara slid into the buttery leather of the back seat, adjusting Leo so he could continue to sleep comfortably. Jaehua entered from the other side, the space suddenly feeling both smaller and infinitely more secure. The car pulled out into the Seoul night, a river of light and motion. After years of seeing the city only as a glittering, distant tableau, being in it was a sensory shock. The blur of neon, the sound of other cars, the sheer, overwhelming reality of it all. She felt a wave of dizziness, a disorienting mix of terror and exhilaration. "Are you all right?" Jaehua's voice was low beside her. I don't know what I am," she answered honestly, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at his profile, silhouetted against the city lights. His features were clean, sharp lines, a strong jaw, a straight nose. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps in his late 30s. "You are safe," he said, as if it were the only answer that mattered. "My mother is waiting for you. The estate is an hour outside the city. It is completely secure." His mother. The detail was unexpected, grounding. Mafia bosses, powerful chaebol chairmen, they didn't usually lead with their mothers. It was a detail designed to reassure her, and to her surprise, it did. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been circling in her mind. "Why go to all this trouble? For an architect?" He turned to look at her then, his dark eyes holding hers in the dim light of the car. "I am a builder, Ms. Vance. It is in my family's blood. We build bridges, we build towers, we build networks, but above all, we value the architect, the visionary, the one who sees the structure before the first stone is laid." He paused, his gaze dropping to the sketchbook clutched in her hand. "I believe in rewarding talent, and I believe in punishing thieves." There was no emotion in his voice when he said the last part, which made it all the more chilling. It was not a statement of anger. It was a statement of principle. Marcus had not just offended him by striking a woman in his presence. He had offended his entire worldview by stealing the work of a true creator. They drove in silence for a while, the city giving way to darker, winding country roads. Leo stirred in her arms, his small face scrunching up. She instinctively rocked him, murmuring soft, soothing sounds. He settled again, his hand clutching a fold of her shirt. "He looks like you," Jaehua observed quietly. "He has his father's temper," she replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. A bitter truth. "Temper is energy," Jaehua said, his tone thoughtful. "It can be shaped, channeled. It is only destructive when it is undisciplined." He looked at her. "You have a great deal of discipline, Ms. Vance." She did not know how to respond to that. It was true. Her discipline was the spine that had held her up for 3 years. It was what had allowed her to keep designing in secret, to keep her mind sharp, to shield Leo from the worst of the oppressive atmosphere in the penthouse. To have it seen, to have it named by this quiet, powerful man, was unnervingly intimate. The car slowed, turning onto a gravel path. High stone walls loomed on either side, topped with discreet security cameras. A massive iron gate, intricately wrought with a design of cranes and pine trees, barred their way. An old woman stood just inside, holding a lantern, though the drive was well lit. She was small and wiry, her face a road map of wrinkles, her white hair pulled into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple, traditional hanbok. As the car approached, she opened the gate herself, bowing her head slightly to the vehicle. "My mother," Jie Hua said simply. "She insisted on welcoming you herself." The estate was not a modern fortress of glass and steel, but a sprawling traditional Korean house, or hanok, built around a series of serene courtyards. Moonlight silvered the dark, curved roof tiles and glinted off the still water of a large koi pond. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. It was the kind of silence that healed. Jae Hwa's mother, Mrs. Kwan, greeted them as they stepped out of the car. She ignored her son completely at first, her sharp, bird-like eyes fixed on Alara and the sleeping child in her arms. She spoke in Korean, her voice surprisingly strong. Jae Hwa translated. "She says you look tired, but your spirit is strong. She says the child is beautiful." Mrs. Kwan reached out a small, wrinkled hand and gently touched Leo's cheek. It was a gesture of welcome, of acceptance. Then she looked at Alara, her gaze taking in the fading red mark on her face. Her expression hardened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of the same steel Alara had seen in her son. "She says the man who did this will see his world turn to ash," Jae Hwa translated, his voice flat. Mrs. Kwan then spoke directly to Alara in slow, careful English. "You are safe here. This is your home now. Come, you must eat." Alara found herself led into a warm, fragrant kitchen where a simple meal of rice porridge and tea had been laid out. The exhaustion of the night, of the past 3 years, washed over her in a wave. She sat, and for the first time since Leo was born, she allowed herself to be taken care of. She ate while Jae-hwa and his mother watched over her and her sleeping son, 2 silent guardians at the gate of her new life. She was beginning to understand. This wasn't a cage, it was a sanctuary, and within its walls she might finally have the space to rebuild. The first few days at the Kwan estate were a study in decompression. Alara slept more than she had in years, a deep, dreamless sleep free from the low-grade hum of anxiety that had been her constant companion. The estate was a world unto itself, a labyrinth of interconnected buildings, serene gardens, and quiet courtyards. It was old, built with the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of generations of patience and resources. Every beam, every tile, every polished wooden floor seemed imbued with a sense of permanence. Leo, after a brief period of shyness, blossomed in this new environment. He chased butterflies in the gardens, chattered at the colorful koi in the pond, and was endlessly fascinated by Mrs. Kwan, whom he followed around like a small, curious shadow. The old woman, for her part, seemed delighted by his presence. She taught him the Korean words for flower and fish and dragonfly, her stern face softening into a web of fond wrinkles whenever he was near. Alara watched him, a painful lump forming in her throat. This was the childhood he was meant to have, filled with sunlight and discovery, not the sterile, climate-controlled perfection of the penthouse. The guilt was a sharp, physical ache. She had kept him safe, yes, but at what cost? She was sitting on a wooden veranda overlooking a garden of meticulously raked sand when Jae Hwa found her. He moved so silently she didn't notice him until he spoke. "Regret is a poor building material, Ms. Vance." She looked up, startled. He was standing a few feet away, holding 2 cups of tea. He wore a simple gray linen shirt and dark trousers, a departure from his immaculate suits. The casual attire made him seem more approachable, yet no less formidable. He offered her a cup. She took it, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. "Is there any other kind?" she asked quietly. "Hope," he replied, sitting not beside her but on a smooth gray stone a respectful distance away. "And anger. Anger can be a very effective foundation, if used correctly." She considered his words. "I think I've run out of anger. I'm just tired." "Rest, then," he said. "There is time." But she was tired of resting. She was tired of being passive. She had been a passenger in her own life for too long. "What is happening with Marcus?" she asked, her voice firm. Jae-hwa took a slow sip of his tea. "His world is being deconstructed, systematically. The Shanghai creditors, whose loans he personally guaranteed, have called in their notes. The City Planning Commission has discovered several significant irregularities in his building permits for 3 major projects. A number of his key executives have suddenly found more promising opportunities elsewhere." He delivered this information with the same calm neutrality he might use to describe the weather. It was a corporate metaphor for utter annihilation. "You're destroying him," she stated. "I am balancing the books," he corrected. "He took something of immense value. A debt is being collected, with interest." His eyes met hers. "This is not for me, Ms. Vance. This is for you, but I will not proceed without your consent. If you wish for me to stop, I will." The offer hung in the air between them. The power to decide. It was a gift more precious than safety, more valuable than wealth. For years she had had no choices. Now she was being given the ultimate one. She thought of the sting of his hand on her cheek. She thought of the fear she had lived with daily, the constant threat to her son. She thought of her stolen work, her stolen name. "Don't stop," she said, her voice cold and clear as glass. "I want to see the balance sheet." A flicker of something, respect, approval, passed through his dark eyes. He gave a single sharp nod. "It will be done." The conversation shifted something in her. The lethargy began to recede, replaced by a familiar, restless energy. The next morning, she approached him while he was reviewing documents in a large, sunlit study filled with books. "I need a studio," she said without preamble. "A drafting table, proper lighting, access to architectural software, and my sketchbooks, the ones left in the penthouse." He looked up from his papers, a faint smile touching his lips. It was the first time she had seen him almost smile. "I was wondering when you would ask. Min Jun has already procured the finest equipment available. It is being installed in the East Wing. As for your sketchbooks?" He tapped a key on his laptop, turning the screen toward her. It showed a live feed from a security camera. 2 of his men were carefully packing the contents of her former studio in the penthouse, placing each book and drawing into archival boxes. "They will be here by evening." He had anticipated her need. He had not presumed to act on it, but he had prepared for it. The distinction was crucial. He was not controlling her. He was facilitating her. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "Competence should never be hindered by a lack of tools," he replied, turning back to his work. The days that followed found a new rhythm. Alara would spend the mornings with Leo, exploring the grounds, their laughter echoing in the quiet courtyards. In the afternoons, while Leo napped under the watchful eye of Mrs. Kwan or one of her trusted housekeepers, Ilara would retreat to her new studio. It was a magnificent space, a converted pavilion with one entire wall made of glass, overlooking a tranquil bamboo forest. The drafting table was a sleek, modern marvel. The computer was loaded with every program she could possibly desire, and her sketchbooks, all of them, were arranged neatly on a long shelf. At first, she just sat in the space, breathing it in. The freedom was so vast it was almost paralyzing. Then she opened a fresh sketchbook. Her hand hesitated over the blank page. For 3 years, her creativity had been an act of defiance, a secret rebellion. Now, it was an invitation. She began to draw. Not buildings at first. She drew the pattern of light through the bamboo. She drew the intricate joinery of the pavilion's roof beams. She drew Leo's face as he slept, the perfect, peaceful curve of his cheek. She was reconnecting the lines between her hand, her eye, and her heart. Jae-hwa never intruded, but she was often aware of his presence. Sometimes she would look up and see him standing by the koi pond, speaking quietly into his phone, his gaze distant. Other times, they would share the evening meal, often with his mother. The conversations were quiet, revolving around art, history, food. He had a deep, scholarly knowledge of Korean ceramics. She found herself talking about the principles of Gothic architecture. They were learning the shape of each other's minds. One evening she found him in the studio, long after she had retired for the night. He was not looking at her current work. He was carefully leafing through one of her old sketchbooks, the one from her university days. He looked up as she entered, not with the guilt of someone caught snooping, but with the quiet concentration of a scholar. "Your early work on tensile structures," he said, his voice soft in the quiet room. "You were already thinking about the distribution of stress in a way most seasoned architects never grasp. It's not just about engineering. It's about elegance. You make tension look like grace." She stood in the doorway, her heart beating a little faster. He wasn't just looking at her drawings. He was reading them. He understood her language, the visual syntax she used to shape space and light. "Marcus always said my ideas were too impractical," she confessed, the memory leaving a bitter taste. "He is a man who can only see the cost of things, not their value," Jae-hwa replied, closing the book gently. "The impractical dream of one generation is the landmark of the next." He looked at her, his expression serious. "I did not rescue a damsel in distress, Ms. Vance. I made a strategic investment in a visionary." The words hung between them, redefining their relationship once again. This was not about romance. Not yet. It was about respect. A profound, soul-deep recognition of her worth that she was only just beginning to recognize in herself. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Chairman Kwan," she said, her voice finding a new strength. "I stay. I build." He gave that small, almost smile again. "I am counting on it, Alara." It was the first time he had used her name. It felt less like an intimacy and more like a confirmation, an acknowledgement that she was no longer Ms. Vance, the victim. She was Alara, the architect, and she was finally ready to build again. The news of Marcus Thorne's spectacular collapse was not a sudden explosion, but a controlled demolition reported in the dry, dispassionate pages of the financial press. Sung Jin Group acquires a majority stake in Thorne Holdings. Thorne's flagship projects, including the beleaguered Obsidian Spire, are indefinitely suspended pending a full structural and financial audit. Marcus Thorne resigns as CEO, citing personal reasons. From the sanctuary of the Kwan estate, Alara read the articles with a strange sense of detachment. It felt like reading about a character in a novel, a villain whose downfall was both inevitable and distant. The man who had dominated her reality for 3 years was being systematically erased, reduced to a footnote in a business transaction. Marcus, however, was not a man to accept erasure. His arrogance was a force of nature, a blinding sun that prevented him from seeing the eclipse that was devouring him. Stripped of his company, his projects, and his social standing, he fixated on the one thing he believed he still controlled: his narrative. From a rented office with a view of a brick wall, he began his counteroffensive. He called his last remaining loyalist, a slick lawyer named Peterson who specialized in messy divorces and public relations warfare. "She'll be back," Marcus insisted, pacing the small office. He was thinner, his expensive suit hanging slightly off his frame. The performative relaxation had been replaced by a wire-taut energy. "Give her a week, maybe 2. She can't create without me. I'm her muse, her patron. This Kwan fellow, he's a gangster, a thug. He can't appreciate her art. He's probably keeping her locked in a basement." Peterson, a man who had seen delusion in many forms, simply nodded and took notes. "So the strategy is to wait for her to return?" "No," Marcus snapped. "The strategy is to force her hand. We leak the story. Brilliant architect Alara Vance, mother of my child, brainwashed and kidnapped by a notorious Korean crime lord. We paint him as a monster, her as a tragic victim. We file for sole custody of Leo. We use the courts. It's the one place his kind of power can't reach. We'll drown him in paperwork and public scrutiny." He was working from a version of Jae-hwa Kwan that was a crude, racist caricature. He had not updated the file. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the power he was up against. Jae-hwa's power was not the brutish force of a street thug. It was the deep, structural power of a sovereign. It owned the street, the bank that held the mortgage on the street, and the politician who zoned the street. The first salvo was a story leaked to a notorious online gossip columnist, filled with dramatic, fabricated details of Alara's ordeal. It was accompanied by a paparazzi photo of her and Leo in the Kwan Estate Gardens, shot from a great distance with a powerful lens. The headline screamed, "Captive Beauty, Developer's Muse Held Hostage by Asian Mob Boss." Alara saw the article on a tablet Jae-hwa's assistant, Min Jun, brought to her. Her first reaction was a hot flash of rage. Her privacy, her son's privacy, had been violated. Her image was being twisted, her story stolen and rewritten once again. Jae-hwa entered the room as she was reading, his face a calm mask. "He is predictable," was all he said. "He's using my son," Alara said, her voice shaking with fury. "He's putting a target on my son's back." "No," Jae-hwa stated with absolute certainty. "He is not. The photographer who took that picture is currently explaining the precise technical specifications of his lens to my head of security. The columnist who published the story is about to receive a lawsuit for defamation that will bankrupt her and her publication. And the server hosting the article is experiencing a significant and permanent technical failure." He paused. "This is noise, Alara. A tantrum. It is meaningless." His calm efficiency was a balm on her anger. He was not reacting to Marcus's moves. He was simply absorbing them and rendering them inert. The next move was the one Alara had dreaded. Marcus filed a petition in family court for sole custody of Leo, alleging that Alara was mentally unstable and living in a dangerous environment unfit for a child. The documents were a work of fiction, painting her as a hysterical, unreliable woman and Jae-hwa as a violent criminal. Jae-hwa's legal team, a phalanx of the most expensive and ruthless lawyers in Seoul, received the filing. Their lead counsel, a sharp woman named Ms. Choi, met with Jae-hwa and Alara in the estate's library. "This is a desperate, foolish move," Ms. Choi said, her tone dismissive. "The allegations are baseless and easily disproven. We can have this thrown out in a preliminary hearing." "No," Jae-hwa said quietly. "Do not have it thrown out. Accept it. Agree to his demand for a formal deposition." Both Ilara and Ms. Choi looked at him in surprise. "Sir?" Ms. Choi questioned. "That would give him a platform." "Precisely," Jae-hwa said. "He believes the legal system is his stage. So we will give him one, a stage of our choosing." He turned to Alara. "He has made a fatal miscalculation. He thinks he is dragging you into his world. In truth, he is stepping into mine." The trap was set with quiet, devastating precision. Marcus, buoyed by what he perceived as a victory, was informed that Alara and her counsel had agreed to a private arbitration and deposition. His lawyer, Peterson, was wary. "This is too easy, Marcus. They're giving us exactly what we want." "Of course they are," Marcus scoffed, his old arrogance returning in a rush. "They're scared. They don't want this playing out in the public eye. Kwan can't afford the scrutiny." The location for the deposition was set. Not a sterile law office or a courthouse, but a private suite at the prestigious Shilla Hotel on the evening of the annual Obsidian Gala, the country's foremost architectural award ceremony. It was the very event where Marcus had once dreamed of being crowned for his masterpiece. Jae-hwa's lawyers framed it as a matter of convenience and discretion, a neutral ground before the evening's festivities. For Marcus, it was an irresistible lure, an opportunity to confront Alara on the eve of what should have been his greatest triumph, a chance to reassert his dominance in the heart of the world that had cast him out. He saw it as the perfect backdrop for his victory. He did not see that the backdrop was, in fact, the entire stage, and it belonged to Jae-hwa Kwan. The Obsidian Gala was sponsored every year by one primary patron. This year, for the first time, that patron was the Sung-jin Group. Alara stood before the mirror, her reflection looking back at her like a stranger. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, a dress with clean architectural lines that fell to the floor in a perfect column. It was a dress that conveyed strength, not fragility. Her hair was swept up, revealing the strong line of her neck and jaw. The faint trace of the bruise on her cheek was long gone, but the memory of it was a cold, hard stone in her gut. Mrs. Kwan stood behind her, adjusting a small antique jade pin on her shoulder. "Tonight," the old woman said in her careful English, "you are not a survivor. You are a queen reclaiming her throne." Ilara met her eyes in the mirror. "I'm afraid." "Fear is a signal," Mrs. Kwan replied, her wrinkled hands surprisingly strong on Ilara's shoulders. "It tells you that something important is about to happen. My son understands this. He does not fight fear. He uses it." Jae-hwa was waiting for her at the bottom of the grand staircase. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, the starkness of it emphasizing his aura of absolute stillness. When he saw her, his perpetually calm expression shifted. For a fraction of a second, something unguarded flickered in his eyes. Admiration, appreciation, something deeper. He said nothing, but the look was more potent than any compliment. He simply offered her his arm. The ballroom at the Shilla Hotel was a galaxy of power and influence. The air hummed with quiet conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet. Every major figure in Korean architecture, construction, and finance was there. And as Ilara entered on Jae-hwa Kwan's arm, a hush fell over the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to them. It was not the gawking curiosity of the gossip columns. It was the sharp, calculating attention of the powerful, recognizing a shift in their universe. Ilara felt a tremor of stage fright, but Jae-hwa's hand was a steady, warm presence on her arm. He led her not to a table, but toward a set of discreet doors leading to a private lounge where the deposition was to take place. Marcus was already there, pacing like a caged animal. He was also in a tuxedo, but his was just a costume. His face was pale, his eyes fever-bright with a mixture of rage and anticipation. His lawyer, Peterson, stood by the window, looking deeply uncomfortable. When Ilara entered, Marcus's eyes locked on her. He drank in the sight of her, the magnificent gown, the regal posture. His expression was a toxic cocktail of longing, fury, and possessiveness. "Ilara," he breathed, taking a step toward her. I knew you'd come to your senses." She extricated her arm from Jae-hwa's and faced him alone. "I am here for the deposition, Marcus, as requested." Jae-hwa and his lawyer, Ms. Choi, moved to one side of the room, becoming silent observers. Marcus's face twisted. "Don't play these games. This is beneath you. It's beneath us. Send these people away. We need to talk. About us. About Leo." "There is nothing to talk about," she said, her voice even. The rejection, so calm and final, broke through his delusion. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm, his grip painfully tight. The scene was a horrifying echo of their last encounter in the penthouse. "You owe me!" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, his face close to hers. "Everything you are, I made you. I gave you the resources, the focus. You think you can just walk away? With my son? With my designs? You have an obligation to me." Ilara looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his contorted face. She felt no fear, only a cold, profound pity. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of a life he had built on lies. "Let go of my arm, Marcus," she said. It was not a plea. It was a command. "Not until you listen to me. You are my wife in all but name. You will come back with me. You belong to me." "She belongs to no one." Jae-hwa's voice cut through the tense air, quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. He had not moved from his spot, but his presence filled the room. Marcus's head snapped toward him, his eyes wild. "You stay out of this, Kwan. This is a family matter." Jae-hwa took one slow step forward. "Mr. Thorne, you have made several claims. Let us address them. You claim Ms. Vance has an obligation to you. You claim her work belongs to you. You claim her son belongs to you. You are mistaken on all counts." He spoke calmly, as if explaining a complex but logical theorem. "Let's start with the designs." He gestured to Ms. Choi, who produced a tablet. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the intellectual property rights for every design credited to you over the past 3 years have been legally reverted to their original creator, Ms. Ilara Vance. Your confession of fraud to your former head of security, Mr. Chen, who was, I should note, on my payroll for the last 6 months, was most helpful in expediting the process. Marcus stared, his face draining of color. What? That's impossible. Now, let's discuss your financial standing, Jae-hwa continued, his voice relentlessly placid. He held up his own phone, the screen glowing. You believe you have assets. You do not. Every loan, every line of credit, every investment you ever had has been acquired by a network of subsidiary corporations. That network, in turn, is wholly owned by the Sung Jin Group. He turned the phone so Marcus could see the screen, which displayed a final, completed stock acquisition. Thorne Holdings, and by extension you, Mr. Thorne, are now my property, and your position has been made redundant. The corporate jargon was more brutal than any physical blow. Marcus staggered back, his hand falling away from Ilara's arm. He looked from the phone to Jae-hwa's impassive face, his mind refusing to process the information. Finally, Jae-hwa said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its clinical edge and taking on a sliver of ice. Let us discuss your son. Your petition for custody has been rendered moot. At 8 a.m. tomorrow, you have a hearing with the prosecutor's office. The charges are kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and aggravated assault. We have 3 years of encrypted data from the penthouse's security system, your financial records, and sworn testimony from a dozen of your former employees. He paused, letting the full weight of the words land. You will not be seeing Leo again. Not for a very, very long time. The collapse was total. It was not a slow crumble, but a sudden, catastrophic failure of the entire structure. The arrogance, the rage, the delusion, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man. Marcus's face, which had been a mask of fury, crumpled like a piece of paper. A choked, horrifying sound escaped his throat, a sob of pure, abject despair. He fell to his knees. No, he wept, the word dissolving into incoherent babbling. Please, please, don't. I have nothing. Please. He was no longer a tyrant. He was just a pathetic, broken man, kneeling on the expensive carpet of a room full of people he had intended to dominate. The architect of his own ruin. 2 of Jae-hwa's men, who had been standing discreetly outside the door, entered the room. They moved with the same quiet efficiency as they had in the penthouse. They gently but firmly lifted the sobbing Marcus to his feet and escorted him out a side exit, his cries fading down the service corridor. Silence descended on the room. Peterson, the lawyer, looked pale and sick. He simply gathered his briefcase and left without a word. Ilara stood motionless, the ghost pressure of Marcus's hand still on her arm. She was breathing, but it felt like the first breath after a lifetime underwater. It was over. Not just the threat, but the entire sordid history. It had been dismantled piece by piece and swept away. Jae-hwa walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He just stood before her, his dark eyes searching hers. Are you all right? She looked at him, the man who had deconstructed her prison with the same precision she used to design buildings. She saw the quiet power, the unyielding loyalty, the profound respect he had shown her from the very beginning. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness or fear. It was a tear of release. Yes, she whispered, and for the first time, a real smile touched her lips, reaching her eyes. Yes, I am. The murmur of the gala outside the lounge was a distant sea. The world was waiting. Jae-hwa let the silence hold for a moment longer, allowing the storm to pass completely. Then he offered her his arm again. There is one last piece of business, he said, his voice gentle, and this one is yours alone. He led her out of the lounge and back into the main ballroom. The ambient chatter died down once more as they walked toward the main stage, where the awards ceremony was about to begin. The host, a famous news anchor, looked toward Jae-hwa with a questioning expression. Jae-hwa gave a subtle nod. He did not lead her to a seat. He led her up the small set of stairs to the stage itself. He walked to the podium, the entire room's attention held captive. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone but losing none of its quiet authority. "The Sungjin Group is proud to be the patron of this year's Obsidian Gala. We are here tonight to celebrate vision, integrity, and the power of architecture to shape our world." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. For the past several years, the industry has been captivated by a series of bold, innovative designs. The Blue Reef Conservatory, the Solaris Tower, the initial plans for the Obsidian Spire. These projects were credited to one man, but they were the work of another, a true visionary whose name was stolen, whose voice was silenced. A wave of whispers rippled through the audience. Jae-hwa turned and gestured to Alara, who stood frozen a few feet away, bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights. "Tonight, that changes," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "It is my distinct honor to introduce you to the mind that conceived of those landmarks, the most capable person in every room she has ever entered. The architect who will be leading Sungjin's new global design initiative, the Phoenix Project." He looked directly at her, his voice softening but still carrying throughout the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Alara Vance." For a second, there was stunned silence. Then, one person began to clap. It was an elderly, respected architect in the front row. Then another joined, and another, until the entire ballroom erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It was not applause born of politeness. It was a roar of acknowledgement, of correction, of a story finally being set right. Alara stood, paralyzed as the sound washed over her. It was a physical force, a wave of validation so powerful it threatened to sweep her off her feet. She looked at the faces in the crowd, faces of her peers, of the giants of her profession, and saw respect. She looked at Jae-hwa, who was watching her, not the audience. His expression was one of quiet, profound satisfaction. He had not just given her safety, he had given her back her name, her legacy, her rightful place in the world. She stepped forward to the podium, her emerald gown shimmering under the lights. The applause slowly subsided. She gripped the sides of the lectern, her knuckles white. She looked out at the sea of faces, and for the first time in years she felt no fear. She felt placed. Correctly placed. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. I have always believed that a building is a promise of shelter, of community, of beauty. For a long time, I forgot how to believe in promises." She took a deep breath, her gaze finding Jae-hwa's. "Tonight, you have reminded me. The Phoenix Project will be our promise to the future. A promise that what is broken can be rebuilt, stronger, more beautiful. Thank you." She stepped back, and the applause returned, even louder this time. It was the sound of her future beginning. Later that night, she stood on the private balcony of the suite Jae-hwa had reserved. The city of Seoul was spread out before her, a breathtaking tapestry of light and life. The cool night air felt clean against her skin. The heavy silk of the gown was a comforting weight. She was no longer watching the city from behind impenetrable glass. She was a part of it. The door opened and closed softly. Jae-hwa came to stand beside her, a glass of water in his hand. He offered it to her. She took it, their fingers brushing. A simple electric touch. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the endless flow of traffic on the bridges below. "He seems warm," she said, a small, wry smile on her face. It was an inside joke she didn't know he was privy to. "Who?" he asked, genuinely confused. "The city," she clarified. "From the penthouse, it always looked so cold." He understood. "It is not the view that has changed, Alara. It is the window." She turned to him, her expression serious. "What you did tonight, for me, no one has ever done anything like that." "I did nothing," he said, his voice low. "I simply corrected an error in the record. Your talent did the rest." He looked at her, his usual reserve cracking just enough for her to see the emotion beneath. "I told you, I am a builder. I cannot abide a flawed foundation." She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, on the fine wool of his tuxedo jacket. "And what are you building now, Jaehwa?" His eyes held hers, a universe of unspoken things passing between them. "I'm not sure," he confessed, his voice a near whisper. "My plans did not extend beyond this night." "Then we'll need a new blueprint," she said, her voice soft but sure. He covered her hand with his own. His was warm, strong, steady. It was not a gesture of possession or control. It was a gesture of connection, a partnership. The final scene of her old life had played out. The antagonist was gone, his empire turned to dust. The quiet, sovereign power of the protector had not just saved her, it had elevated her. But looking at him now, she saw not just a protector, she saw a man who saw her, who respected her, who had waited patiently for her to be ready to see him back. A few weeks later, Alara stood in the east wing of the Kwan estate. But it was no longer just her studio. The space was being transformed. Walls were coming down, light was being let in. Her drafting table was at the center, but around it, the room was becoming a home. A comfortable sofa, a low table for tea, and in one corner, a colorful play area filled with Leo's toys. Leo was helping one of the carpenters, solemnly handing him a wooden block. "Mrs." Kwan watched from a nearby chair, a rare, open smile on her face. Jaehua entered, holding a large roll of blueprints. He walked over to her table, his presence as comfortable and familiar now as the scent of the pines outside. He unrolled the plans. They were for a new wing of the house, a space that connected his private quarters with her new studio home. It was a design for a shared life. "I had some ideas," he said, a hint of wry humor in his tone, "but I suspect they are flawed. I require the services of a better architect." She looked at the plans, then up at him. The slow, respectful development of their relationship had been a process of building trust, of creating a safe space where they could both be themselves. It was not a romance born of fire and passion, but one of recognition and peace. "This archway is all wrong," she said, picking up a pencil. "The stress distribution is inefficient, and it's not beautiful." "Show me," he said, his voice a low invitation. She leaned over the table, her hair brushing his sleeve, and began to draw. She altered the lines, reshaped the spaces, her pencil moving with a confidence that had been returned to her. She was creating a new structure, a new blueprint for a family. A family built not on obligation or ownership, but on honesty, complication, and the daily choice to stay. A family built, at last, on a perfect foundation. The future was an unwritten page, and for the first time she held the pen, and beside her stood the man who had made sure she would have a world worthy of her designs.